Alexis divided her time between painting and in her studio and out painting outdoors on location. She has recently been designated as one of the Watercolor Artist magazine's One to Watch. This is an accolade of great distinction, as is her signature membership in the National Watercolor Society. Alexis is an enthusiastic art instructor who teaches paintings and drawing classes and workshops. She gives her students a sound background in technique and aesthetics and encourages them to express their individuality through their art and helps them to relax and enjoy their artistic pursuits. Alexis watercolors are full of luminous color, rich shadows, and beautifully drawn shapes. This that with meticulous attention to composition, her crafts, paintings that are descriptive and yet expressive, realistic and yet abstract. She lives and paints in the Central North Carolina. She professional affiliations is the National Watercolor Society, signature member. Transparent Watercolor Society of America, signature and life member. Watercolor USA Honor Society, signature member. Watercolor West, signature member. Northeast Watercolor Society, signature member. Southern Watercolor Society, signature member. Baltimore Watercolor Society, signature and life member. Watercolor Society of North Carolina, signature member. Piedmont Outdoor Painting Society, signature member. Her education includes a BA in Studio Art, University of Maryland, and a master's in the Medical Illustration, Johns Hopkins University. Welcome.
Okay, well, there you go. Quite an intro, huh, Alexis?
That's scary to listen. That's kind of scary to listen to all that. Although I will admit, I just have to mention or add that at the top of that list of signature memberships now is the American Watercolor Society too.
You did. You sent us that painting that got you in. So yeah,
so
that's the big one.
Debbie was reading from an older bio or an older version of my website or something. So yeah, that one at the top of the list is really pretty cool now. So anyhow, are we ready to go now?
We are ready to go.
Jump right in.
Yeah. So if everybody stays on mute and you can just tell us what you're going to do. And do you prefer if they unmute themselves and ask questions, or would you prefer them to put it in the chat and then I ask?
I tell you what, how about if people put it in the chat, and I do want to say that when people put messages in the chat, I probably won't see it. I get so busy. I got all this stuff to do. So I probably won't see it. But Susan, you will see it. So if something seems like really like it needs to be answered right now, then interrupt me.
Okay.
I don't mind.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I was kind of hoping to stop 10 or 15 minutes early so that we could have some actual Q&A time.
Questions. Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Okay. And do you want to take a break at all in the middle anywhere, or are you just going to go?
Yeah, I'm going to, at some point, I'm just going to say, let's take 5, everybody. I think it's really good to take a break, and then you can pause the recording or whatever you're doing out there. And yeah,
okay.
I'd like to do that too. Okay.
All right. Well, take it away.
All right, here we go. So, okay. Well, it was a little bit of a rocky start here today, but anyhow, I'm glad we're all here. Thank you. Thank you for not leaving when things were a little bit, didn't know what was happening. So I'm glad you're still here. And let me just say, welcome. I've got some good stuff planned for you, and we'll just get going now. I do want to start by thanking Susan Jockheim and Vicky, who unfortunately can't be with us today, and also Debbie for all of your hard work on getting things organized for today, and also for the workshop. So thank you. And I'll betcha that there are people who I haven't even met yet who are also working behind the scenes. Um, and and so I can't thank them specifically, but you know who you are, and I'm just saying thank you anyhow. And thank you for everybody else for being here. Okay, we can move on from thank yous now. So what I'd like to do is introduce myself, and I'm going to share the screen, which I love to do. So here I am. I'm just going to set up a couple of things on my screen here for a moment. Okay, so anyhow, here I am right here with this big blue star. I live in Greensboro, North Carolina. You can see for anybody who's been following, I imagine out in California, you've been getting all those horrible, dire reports about Hurricane Helene and how awful it was in North Carolina. And let me just reassure you that we're all fine here in Greensboro. The places that were affected are more to, well, pretty much mostly to our west towards Asheville, which you can see here out in the mountains. We had a little bit of wind and rain, but we're pretty much fine here. So I'm great for Zooming today. Anyhow, welcome to Greensboro and welcome to my house. This is the way you get into my house. Come right up this ramp and into my back door and into my studio. So this is where I am right now, Zooming with you. I'm sitting right here, looking into my lovely iMac computer. This is where I'm going to be painting for you in a little while, and I just want to show you the way I have things set up. This weird little thing in the upper left of the picture is my lovely zoom camera, which shoots straight down onto my painting and my palette. You're going to get a front row seat. That's the nice thing about Zoom. Okay, in fact, this is what you're going to see, not this demo, but you're going to see something like this when I get started. And it'll be this way in the workshop as well. So you'll see my painting in progress, my palette, my hand moving, and my mouth going. So that's what's going to be happening. This is what I see also when I look into my computer. So, okay, so in 3 weeks from tomorrow, in fact, I'll be teaching my workshop for all of you called Design for Success. So what I'm going to do today, this afternoon, is kind of give you a little peek into what I'll be doing in 3 weeks. I do want to mention every day there will be it's a 3-day workshop. Every day there will be a lesson and a demo. And then what I refer to as one-on-one time, which is when I speak individually with each person in the workshop if they want to talk to me. It'll kind of look like this. You won't see this happening today, but if you're in the workshop, I will encourage you to send me pictures of your paintings, your source photos. This is from a recent student, and you can see she texted me pictures of, see, here's her photograph on the left of a horse. And then here she sent it to me in grayscale. And here's her drawing. And here's an earlier version of her painting. And here's the current version. It's a really, really great way for me to see what you're doing and to give you tons of feedback and ideas and make plans together. So it's really, really great. So that's the third part of the workshop. Again, one-on-one time. And that will happen every single day of the workshop. Okay, so I just want to talk about design for a minute because the workshop is all about design. It's called Design for Success. I believe that design is incredibly important in making art that is successful, that communicates, that grabs your viewer. If I have to define design, I define it as organizing everything that's in your painting, or arranging all the pieces together that are going to go on your piece of watercolor paper. There are many concepts related to design. What I'm going to do today is just kind of give you a teeny tiny design lesson, followed by some on-screen painting. Um, uh, just a tiny portion of what's going to happen 3 weeks from now when we're in the workshop. Um, so what I have done, or what I'm going to do, is distill a whole lot of ideas down into just a few today that I think are extremely helpful. Okay, ready to go? Let's do it. I'm going to share the screen again. Back to the photos. Okay, so making a painting requires several things. We start with an idea, a purpose for making a painting, a feeling about something, or perhaps you have a story to tell, a reason to put some color on a piece of paper. All right, so we start with an idea, and then we add in some skill. Okay, making a painting requires a certain amount of skill. Can we draw well enough? Do we know how to use our tools? Are we reasonably adept at the various techniques to get our paint from our palette into our brushes and onto our paper? And I think we all know that with watercolor, yeah, it's particularly a little bit finicky in the skill department. All right. And then, boom, we have design. So how are we going to arrange our shapes, our colors, our values, and all that other good stuff to achieve the best results? And I will say that I truly believe that design is essential in this process. Every shape, every edge, every color, line, texture in your painting needs to be thoughtfully and strategically placed upon your paper. And then combined with your skill, yes, and your ideas, yes, you're going to achieve success. This takes some practice, of course, and some time, and some commitment, and determination, stubbornness. I've been working on this for decades, believe me, a long time. And you know what? Every decade that I've been at it, I've gotten better in all three of these categories. And you will too. All right. So I'm going to focus on these 5 very important areas of design today, which I think are extremely useful. These 5 areas also show up, I will say, not infrequently, needing help in many of my students' paintings. I'm not necessarily saying yours. I don't know you yet, but these 5 areas are really worth talking about. Super important. But let me just say also, before I die, I'm going to talk about each of these 5 areas in a minute. There are many more areas and concepts of design. There isn't enough time to go into all of it in this presentation, but I will go into it a whole lot more in the workshop. But anyhow, these are 5 good places to start. And if you do take the workshop, we're going to dive in much more deeply. But let's do these 5 areas for starters. Are you ready? Here we go. Uh-oh. You know what? We've had problems with Zoom today. And guess what? My photo program just decided to give me a little bit of a hiccup. So, what else can go wrong today?
That's okay. We all, things happen. I mean, we know
Indeed.
that. Yeah.
I am attempting to close out my photo program. Let's open it back up again. Oh my gosh. Let's see if it's going to work now. Too funny. All right. I'm
We can
just
always
trying to
tell
stay,
jokes while you're waiting.
really, I'm just trying to stay really calm here now at this moment, Susan.
Know the feeling.
All right, let's see. Here we go. Is it going to work?
Okay.
Yes, it's going to
Yay!
work. Okay, so we're going to start out. Oh dear. We're going to start out by talking about focal area. Are you all with me? Am I sharing the screen now? You see this slide that says focal area? We
Yes,
good now? All
yes,
right, now do you see a lady?
we do.
All right, let's talk about focal area. The focal area is the most important part of your painting, really. It's the center of any drama that you're setting up. It is usually the most interesting part of the painting, and it's the part of the painting where you want your viewer to look first and last and longest. Okay, so you want to get your viewer to your focal area. I will say that every now and then there's a painting that doesn't really require a focal area, but most paintings do. And I frequently find myself asking my students, tell me, what's your focal area? All right, I think it's pretty clear that in this painting, the focal area is meant to be the lady's face and her hand. That's the star attraction of the painting. Okay, so how did I create that focal area? Okay, here's some great advice. Place your greatest value contrasts in and around your focal area. That means your darkest darks and your lightest lights in and around your focal area. And that's precisely what I've done. My darkest dark in the whole painting is right here in the background, behind the lady's face and hand. The lightest lights are right here, hitting the front part of her face where she's looking into the sun, her backlit hair, a little bit on her hand. Boom, darkest darks, lightest lights. Everywhere else in the painting, you don't have as great of a spread or contrast between darks and lights. It's all just a little bit closer to mid-value in the rest of the painting. Okay, next piece of advice. Place your most intense and contrasting colors in and around your focal area. All right, let's look again. See what's happening in her face and her hair? Lovely, warm colors. Do you see that? What's happening everywhere else? Cooler colors. I'm going to talk a little bit more about color in a few minutes. So anyhow, I've got warms contrasting with cools in and around the focal area. Again, boom, it's like a big magnet drawing my viewer in there. Another thing to create a focal area, put your hardest, sharpest, most defined edges in and around your focal area. So if you look at the edges of shapes, in other words, where one shape meets an adjacent shape in the focal area, for the most part, they're hard and sharp and defined. As we move away from the focal area, those edges are going to get softer and even lost. Look at the edge along the side of the lady's arm. See where I'm running my arrow? As we go down, 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 and out the bottom of the painting, that edge is getting softer and softer. And look what happens down here in the lower left corner. The edge disappears. Do you see that? Follow the edge on her shoulder, on our right side, her left shoulder. As we go down, 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 that edge is getting softer and softer until look what happens in the lower right corner, disappearing. The value contrast is disappearing too, isn't it? The color contrast is disappearing too in the lower right corner. Everything I could do there is making that lower right corner as quiet as possible. Here's where I want the noise in my focal area. Do you all see that? Okay. So here's an interesting little picture. where do you want to put your focal area on your paper? So generally speaking, if this is my painting, I'm crossing out the far periphery of the painting. I don't want my focal area too close to the physical edge of the painting. I'm also crossing out the center part. I generally don't want my focal area too close to dead bullseye center of the painting, but that leaves 4 good areas for my focal area. Lots of good room for the focal area. Sometimes I will say my focal area might kind of encroach on the center. As long as most of it's not, it's fine. It might kind of lap over onto this peripheral area. As long as most of it isn't too close to the physical edge of the painting, that's okay too. Here's a good example. When I see something interesting, like I saw this big, gorgeous head of cabbage plant growing in a community garden, I have this habit. I aim my camera straight at what I'm interested in. And then the focal area of the painting, in this case, the head of the cabbage, comes out. Where is it? Dead center. All right, let's design a better painting. I'm going to show you 3 paintings now that I made from this very same photograph. Watch. See where the head of cabbage went? Off to the right, closer to the bottom. It's a horizontal painting, by the way. Let's do it again. Turn it into a vertical painting. Look where the head of cabbage has moved. Off to the right, this time up to the top, towards the top. Vertical painting. Here's a square painting. Where did that head of cabbage go? Upper left. See that? Here's the photo. Kind of boring. Better design. Different design. Different again. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Positive and negative space. All right. I think you're probably most people are familiar with these terms, positive, negative space. Sometimes we refer to positive and negative shapes. In this painting, the positive space or the positive shape is the flower. That's what we're looking at. We're not really looking at the background too much. That's the negative space. And we've got 4 pieces. This is a painting with a whole lot of positive and not very much negative. It's very important to think when you're designing about the relationship between positive and negative. How much do you have of each? How are they interacting with each other or interlocking with each other? And I think that sometimes people tend to think that the negative space is not important and they don't really need to pay attention to it. I think it's very important, the amount of it, how you paint it, what's its value, what's its color, what's happening there. If you notice these 4 pieces of negative space, do notice everybody. They're all different sizes and they're different shapes, slightly different colors. Do you all see that? Okay, that was all designed very thoughtfully and very carefully. Here's a painting that has again, it's got a lot of positive space, which is the lioness, but it's got a little bit more negative space this time than the camellia flower. Okay, so I'm kind of changing the proportions now between positive and negative. And here's a figurative painting, and we've got a little less positive. That's the girl. Maybe you would include her bag with the figure, but there's a little bit less positive and more negative. Do notice, everybody, the negative space has certainly been decorated back here behind her with some graffiti. That's because I think that the negative space is important and needs to be designed. The photograph, I will say, the photograph that I used to inspire this painting had a very, very, very plain, clean brick wall behind her. Here's a still life. Once again, the positive space is smaller and the negative space is getting a little bit larger. Something else I want to point out on this one, do notice, please, that two places on the positive shape, I've cropped out a little bit deliberately, cropped it out through an edge at the top and also on the side. Keep that in mind. You'll see that in the demo that I'm going to be working on for you in a little while. And here's a landscape. Landscapes sometimes have a whole lot of negative space. I think of the sky and the ocean and even this distant land as all being negative space, with the tree in the foreground stuff being positive. And so, and this seems to frequently, or shall I say, not infrequently happen in a landscape where we end up with a whole lot of negative space. Okay. And let me just say, I'm not sure if I said it before. Don't wait until the last minute to plan your negative space. You should be thinking about it from the very, very beginning. Okay? All right. Let's talk about visual pathways. Visual pathways help your viewer to move their eyes through your painting. They can even get you to your focal area. Hopefully, they will keep your viewer moving through your painting and not leaving it. Okay, let's look at a few visual pathways. This very recent painting shows a visual pathway, literally a physical pathway, taking us right into the painting. Here's one with a shoreline, a ziggy-zaggy shoreline that snakes us back and forth into the painting. It's very easy to enter this painting at the bottom edge and zigzag back and forth and get into the focal area, which is right in here. This painting, I think, is kind of interesting. Once again, with me, please enter the painting at the bottom, and you can follow a visual pathway, which in some cases is the shapes that I've depicted as physical objects in the still life, and sometimes it's just a shadow. So we're going to enter the painting at the bottom through a shadow, cast shadow, then through the candy, then another shadow, then a few more candies, zigzagging up, and then around and around in a circle to hopefully keep my viewer in my painting, enjoying it, and thinking about maybe snacking on some of these lovely shapes. And here's another one. This time, please, with me, enter the painting at the right side through the laundry. All this laundry was designed, there's that word again, designed, as a completely connected white or light shape, moving to our left, moving, 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 connecting with the White House. And then we can move through here. And here's the focal area where I have my lightest light, my lightest light, my darkest dark. But it all hinges on entering the painting from the right and moving in, and then hopefully sticking around to enjoy the painting. Another way of making a visual pathway. Okay. Let me just mention again, as I explained to you with the lady at the beginning, the sunlit lady, on this, if you look at this pathway, now I'm going to move out of the painting, but as I move out of the painting, it's becoming softer edged, and I even put a little bit of a glaze over the laundry, last 5 or 6 pieces of laundry, to dull them down, darken them, gray them down a little bit to make them less eye-catching, to once again keep my viewer in my focal area. Oh, I think this is the last one of visual pathways. This was actually started as a plein air painting some years ago. And I was in a friend's, they had like a little garden shed, and I was inside their garden shed painting. And I took the liberty, as I started this painting, I took the liberty of picking up this trowel, which was on the table, and I moved it. I popped it into this little garden still life that I was looking at, so that it's overlapping, or at least visually overlapping the flower pots. And it creates a visual pathway to pull us into the painting and into the focal area. Let's talk about value, one of my favorite subjects. Here's my value. This is my homemade value finder. I tend to break up values in my own paintings and my sketches into 5 values. If you look from top to bottom, light, light, mid, dark, 5 values is really, in most cases, quite adequate. And I start just about every painting with a small value study. You'll see my actual demo value study in a few minutes. Here's the painting. Okay, value study, painting. Value study, painting. These value studies are very simple. Do you see in the value study, I'm not putting details on the flowers. I don't need to do it in the value study. The details come in here on the painting. Value study in an architectural painting. Here's the painting. And I do want to mention that every now and then I make a painting. This is called high key. What that means is that in this painting, most of the values are middle value and lighter. There are a few darker spots, like a few of these little tiny negative spaces that are rather dark. But most of the rest of the values in this painting are middle value and lighter. We call this high key. This painting, on the other hand, is low key. Most of the values are middle value and darker. Yes, the moon and the reflection are very, very light and bright. Yes, but most of the painting is middle value and darker, and we call this low key. This is the way I usually prefer to paint, and I call this full key, where I've got lights and darks and in between. I think personally, this is most interesting most of the time. Sometimes though, I need to go dark. Sometimes I need to go light. It comes down to my subject and the story that I want to tell. Here's a painting that I did, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. It's an okay painting. And then I punched it up a few months ago. I punched it up, meaning I darkened a whole lot of values on the man in the background. Look at the difference. Can you see? Here it is. Boom. Look how important those values are. Okay. Super, super important. All right. And lastly, we're going to talk about color. So I just want to say color is very powerful, and it's really, really helpful to study color theory and to understand how colors interact with each other and how to mix them and how to design with them. Absolutely. Here's my homemade color wheel. And I just want to say in regard to color that one of the important properties of color to understand is intensity. All the colors that are on the color wheel are at their most intense, meaning bright, full of color. Sometimes we use the word saturated. As in this painting, boom. I mean, every color in here is like jumping off the page, strong, 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 intense. Sometimes we want to paint and make our colors a little quieter. See the difference? Boom. Okay, a little quieter. Sometimes we almost lose the color entirely. And so in this painting, almost all the color has been taken out. It's all grays or quiet colors. Yes, there are a few pops of intense color, like in the taillights, of course, but most of this painting is much, much less intense. So it's important to understand that. Sometimes we think of color in terms of temperature. We refer to this painting as cool, and this one is warm. Do you see the difference? Obviously, yes, two very different subjects, but the temperature is very different, and those temperatures evoke different feelings in your viewer. Okay, back to the color wheel. And here's where I want to talk about complementary colors. I'm sure you know this term. Complementary colors are across the color wheel from each other. So if you look at any color, like for instance, red, slide across the color wheel to the other side and you hit green. These two colors are complementary, meaning they're really, really different at opposite ends of the color wheel. There are two important things to understand about complementary colors. If you mix them together in about equal proportions, they cancel each other out, so to speak, and you end up with gray in the middle of the color wheel. So red and green mixed together will give you a gray or something that's grayish. And you can look at any other color here, like yellow orange, for instance, at upper left. Slide down to lower right, and you've got blue violet. And those are complementary as well. Mixed together, they'll also give you something grayish. The other important thing to know about complements is that when you use them together or near each other or side by side, they they help to create your focal area because they're so different from one another. I just want to show you. Here's the source photo I used to get me started making this painting. Take a look at it. Do you see any red in this photo? Not really. Do you see any green? Not really. I decided to give this guy a red ribbon around his neck and a red bandana. And then to enhance the painting, I decided to contrast these reds with green in the background. Boom. What does that do? It makes my focal area. You know what else it does? It creates a visual pathway. My viewer, this is not necessarily taking my viewer into the painting, but it's going to keep my viewer circling around. You see where I'm doing my arrow? It's going to keep my viewer circling around and around and around my focal area, just where I want my viewer to be. The photo didn't give me that idea. That came from my understanding of color. Here's another red and green complementary relationship in this painting. Mother Nature really knows how to do color theory. Perfect. All right. Let's take a look at the orange and blue relationship now on the color wheel. Ready? Two complements. Here they are. Orange in the elephant, blue or slightly blue-green in the background. By the way, you know what I forgot to mention? Okay, orange and blue are complements. Blue-green and blue-violet, if you move away from the actual complement a little bit, we call that a near complement, and they work almost as well. They do. So there we've kind of moved to a blue-green. Here's another painting, orange, and there's that blue-green again. There's that same complementary relationship. Very different subject, works for anything. It even works for an abstract painting. And here's another abstract. And I put this one up because I think it's kind of easy to imagine. Well, imagine this painting without those little pops of orange. Okay, just kind of take them all out or stick your finger over your Zoom screen, cover up those little orange bits. I think the painting gets really, really boring without those little bits of orange. It needs that complementary color. Those orange bits were designed in, and I really do want to say that painting abstracts, oh my, design is so essential to make a good abstract because you can't rely on imagery. And one last complementary relationship. Let's take a look at yellow and purple. Or of course we can slide over towards blue or slide over a little bit towards red. Here we go. The focal area is the girl in the yellow slicker. Look what's right above her head. What did I do? I put purple. There it is. And then I'm sliding over towards blues and I'm sliding over towards greens. I'm doing everything I can here. Warm subject, warm focal area, sorry. Warm focal area. You could even say warm positive shape. Everything else in the painting is cooler. Here's that same relationship again. Yellow, here's purple just beneath it, and other cool colors. Same relationship as here, here, and once again in an abstract. Wowee. Okay. And there is so much more, but you got to come to the workshop. I hope you will. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do for you this afternoon. I'm going to paint a flower for you. All right, so I've got this lovely photograph. I believe this flower is called Cosmos. I don't know if it grows out there in California. Anyhow, lovely photograph. I'll tell you right away, I'm not interested in the bee. Maybe somebody else would really want to put that bee in if they were making a painting. I'm really not interested in the bee. But I am interested in the beautiful colors of the flowers and their shapes. Oh my goodness, they've got gorgeous shapes. Okay, let's get into this. Here's the start of my value study. And you can see I'm starting it, and this is small. I'm going to show you my sketchbook in a couple of minutes. You'll see it's only about 3 inches on a side. And I start by drawing lines that are describing my main shapes. Now I'm thinking, and by the way, well, I'm thinking now about the negative space. The flowers, by the way, and the stems, that's my big positive shape or positive space. Notice that I'm connecting the flowers. They're all connected. It's 3 separate flowers, but I'm drawing them at least initially as one big interconnected shape surrounded by a big old piece of negative space, which I'm already thinking about making darker than my positive shape. And now I'm adding a little bit of additional information like in the centers of the flowers. That's my value study. That's all I need to do. I make this small, I do it quickly, and then I'm on to drawing on my watercolor paper. I'm using 140-pound cold pressed. I'm pretty sure I'm looking, it's Kilimanjaro, which is Cheap Joe's paper, 140-pound cold pressed Kilimanjaro. And I'm starting by drawing very lightly, very loosely, right onto the paper using a regular, like a number 2 pencil. Now I'm drawing a little more carefully. You can see if you look up here, can you see I've made some corrections on the shapes? This happens a lot. That's why I start out drawing very lightly, because I know I'm going to have to make some corrections. Drawing a little darker with corrections and a little bit darker. And this is pretty much the final drawing, getting ready to paint. Now I want to talk to you before I really am going to start painting in a few minutes. I want to talk to you about the idea of an underpainting. Not always. Please hear that again. Not always, but sometimes I like to start a painting with an underpainting. I wet the whole piece of paper and I start by putting in usually some light value color. In this case, with this painting, I wanted to set up some overall warmth in the painting. And so I started out by dropping in some variegated yellows, wet and wet, variegated yellows, and a few little cooler bits in these 2 corners. And here's the painting. And those yellows are kind of filtering through. They're infusing the whole painting with some warmth, even if they're covered up by something cooler or something a lot darker, they are still sneaking their way in to the overall finished look and feel of the painting. Here I'm starting out with a cool underpainting, and I'm doing it here because I want to set up a feeling of weather and time of day. See the cool? How different it is from the warm. You see that? Cool. And it's starting to set up that feeling, to set the mood, the feeling of the day. And here's an underpainting that's variegated, warmer at the top, cooler at the bottom, thinking about the different actual color areas that are going to be in the final painting. And here's what I've done for starters. An underpainting is really, really wet and really, really sloshy. So I have started your painting a few days ago. I made the underpainting, but guess what? I'm going to make a little tiny underpainting on another piece of paper just to show you how I do it. Let me just mention, I used a bit of masking fluid on the two centers, on the two main flowers. See it? All right, that's just to protect the paper there underneath the masking fluid. I did not want those two areas to get covered with my underpainting. Okay, I think I'm ready to go now to get started. Gonna stop sharing for a minute. How's everybody doing? I hope I haven't lost anybody. Are we good?
We are good. Yes.
Susan, have there been any urgent questions coming in? Because I want to go over to my painting now and get going on that.
Not so far, but maybe you could just talk a little bit more about the paint and brushes and materials you use. Sure.
Guess what? Guess what? Watch what I'm going to show you. Are you ready?
Okay.
Here we go. Look what I got here.
Woohoo.
Paints and brushes and materials. Okay. Excuse me a minute. I have a dog that's right under my painting table. I have to wake her up.
I saw her go by a little while ago.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Dog's gone now. Sorry. Sorry. Had to wake her up. Okay. So here's I'll just show you. Here's the painting, and I am going to start painting in a minute. I'm going to make an underpainting for you on this little piece of paper though in a minute. But yeah, look, Susan, how did I know you were going to ask me that? Okay. So let me just show you in terms of brushes. I can move this over like this and zoom in a little closer. All right, so my favorite brushes these days are these guys right here. Um, these are made by the Princeton Brush Company, and they're called Aqua Elites, and they're really marvelous brushes. They are, I believe, synthetic or synthetic blends, and they're really, really great. You'll see them in action in just a few minutes. I use them for the flats, so these are flats. I also use the rounds, and I have them in like every size that they make. These are just a few of them. Okay. These brushes you'll see me use for my underpainting. These are my little wash brushes, also made by the Princeton Brush Company. When I start talking about brushes, I always have to say, I am not on the payroll of the Princeton Brush Company. I just happen to love their brushes. These are called Neptune. You can see the word Neptune there. And they're called mottlers. You can see how small they are in my hands. They're really quite lovely. I love the way they feel when I hold them. And they hold a lot of paint and water. And I love them for big washy things. Okay, these brushes, which I get from Cheap Joe's, these are my blending brushes. Fan brushes, they're actually called fan brushes. I use them for blending. I do not use them for applying paint, but they're great for blending, smoothing, and you'll probably see me using them today. Okay, these two brushes are two different kinds of scrubber brushes. This is made by Rosemary, and it's called the Eradicator. Um, so you can get these from the Rosemary Brush Company, which I believe is in England. This one is a little easier to find. Guess who makes it again? Princeton. And it's called a chisel blender. You can see I've used this one so much that the paint's actually coming off of the handle. I have a variety of sizes. These two brushes, the Eradicators and the Select Chisel Blenders, are stiffer. The hairs on them are shorter and they're stiffer than, for instance, these lovely watercolor brushes. And so they work really well for softening an edge, lifting paint, making a correction. And I do make corrections all the time. Don't get me wrong, I do. These are great, really great to have. And this lovely thing, toothbrush for spatter, I love. Okay, I just draw most of the time with a plain old #2 pencil like this. This is a Papermate Sharpwriter, a little mechanical pencil. You can buy it at Target or Walmart, pretty much anywhere there are office supplies being sold. Papermate Sharpwriter #2. Lovely for drawing. Okay. My palette is a lidded palette. I have to zoom out now to show you my palette, and this is a good opportunity to open it up. I get this palette from Cheap Joe's. It's called the Miller's Workhorse. It's a really nice palette that has nice big wells. The wells are slanted so I can get my brush right in and slide the paint right out. And it has a nice tightly fitting lid that keeps the paints very, very fresh. Okay, sketchbook, super important. Guess what? Here's my value study. Look at it right inside my hand. Can you see how small it is? This is precisely what I showed you before, the picture, and you can see how small my value study is. Okay, while I have, I'm going to put the sketchbook down here. Okay, I'm going to wake up my iPad. Let's get the picture up. Okay, so here's the picture on my iPad. I never print out photographs anymore. I just look at them on my iPad. So I've got my photo here now, and my value study, and the start of my painting. And now what I want to do is just talk with you quickly in regard to those 5 areas, those 5 areas of design that I just talked to you about. Guess what? I thought about those 5 areas of design when I was designing my painting. All right, so my focal area is going to be in here. Mostly these 2 flowers, not the last one. This one's kind of sliding out of the painting. Mostly these 2 flowers. So my focal area is kind of sliding down and to the left within the context of the square painting. This square painting, I think it's about 12 inches or 13 inches on the side, by the way. So I thought about my focal area. In terms of positive and negative space, do notice that in my source photo, there's actually more negative space. I've cropped some of it out in my painting. So I have less negative space now. The flowers are larger. A greater proportion of the painting now is the flowers, the positive shapes, a little bit less negative. And so I just wanted to make sure that you saw that. Okay. Visual pathways. My hope is that I'm going to use these stems down here from the lower right to get my viewer into the painting, and then kind of keep them circling largely through these two centers of the flowers that are going to kind of keep the viewer circling around them. So enter this way and then circle around. So that's my visual pathway. Value, well, yes, I've thought about the value in general. Negative space is going to be darker, flowers are going to be lighter, and the center is a little bit darker also. And do notice also that I'm also planning, if you look at the value study closely, let's make sure you can see it. Graphite's kind of shiny. It's a little bit darker right in here. Why is that? Because this is my focal area, right? Oh, yes, put the darkest darks right around the focal area. Okay, see, I've thought about all this stuff. In terms of color, I've got some interesting color in this painting, in the source photo and in the painting. Basically, it's pink flowers. That's red, light red, surrounded by greenish negative space. Oh my, look at that. Pink and green, red and green. You don't see the green yet, I know, but it'll be there. Complementary colors, yes. But here's the thing. See the photo? Look how strong that green is. It's really, really intense, almost fighting with the pink. Like, what's more important, the pink or the green? The pink or the green? In my painting, I'm going to dull the green down ever so slightly, so the pink is going to sing right out. That's going to be more important. So do y'all see how I really think about this stuff before I start a painting? I really do, and it makes a better painting. All right, so I started my value study a few days ago so that it would be nice and dry today. But let me just make a really quick value study for, I'm sorry, did I say value study? I meant underpainting. I started this underpainting, made it the other day, so it'd be nice and dry. But I don't want you to think that I'm keeping any secrets from you. All right. So I made a second little drawing, just a smaller version. And I just want to show you how I make a underpainting. I'm going to use my 1-inch wash brush. And I'm just going to brush a lot of water, the whole paper. This painting also has it has the masking fluid on the 2 centers, just as the actual demo does. Okay, so here goes. All right, I'm going to wet the whole thing. When I make an underpainting, I usually like to wet the whole paper first, mix some paint up. While I'm mixing my paint, some of the water is getting absorbed into the surface of the paper. It goes down beneath the surface. The paper frequently starts to buckle. This is already buckling. I let it do that. I mix up some paint and then I re-wet it and then I apply the paint. This is Cheap Joe's Wild Fuchsia, otherwise known as Opera, which is a brilliant intense pink. This is some Cobalt Violet, which is one of my all-time favorite pigments. These are exactly the same pigments I used on your actual demo. See how this is, can you really see how it's buckling up? And unfortunately, I'm using a big board here. Let's clip it. By the way, you might notice that I don't tape my paintings down. I like to leave them loose. And if they start to buckle or I need to clamp them down, I use bulldog clips like this. I like to leave the paper loose so that I can pick it up and I can twist it and turn it. And sometimes I even curl it to get the paint to move. Okay, so these are the same 3 pigments I used in your underpainting. Now I'm wetting the paper again. I want to make sure that it's shiny, shiny, shiny everywhere. Okay, now with my slightly smaller Neptune wash brush, I'm going to get the paint on the paper. Let's just go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm taking these 3 colors, these 3 pigments, and applying them wet and wet around the paper. I want to get them, so that was some of the wild fuchsia. Let's get a little of the cobalt violet moving away. I want the most intense color on the flowers. So here's some more of the wild fuchsia on the flowers. As I move away from the flowers, and by the way, do you notice I'm putting, this is cobalt violet, and I'm even going to drag a bit of the wild fuchsia out into all of the negative space. I want to have that pink color or pinkish color coming under all parts of the painting, not just the flowers. I want that pink kind of sneaking into the negative space, if you will. Now I can get a little bit of the cobalt blue into the negative space. I'm going to paint it on rather carefully. I don't want it going back into the flowers, at least not yet. But I can get a little of that blue started. So this is cobalt blue. Down here, I'm going to have the leaves. We know that blue is in green, right? So this is where I'm going to have my green areas. So I'm just going to get a little of that blue started, okay? I can put it in the upper right, but maybe I won't. Maybe I'll leave that different. I like to have my corners different. One thing I always think about when I make an underpainting is because of all the water, there was water on the paper and then really wet pigment on my palette. It's going to dry a whole lot lighter. So I'm going to add just a little bit more pigment. Okay, this is a bit of cobalt violet in my brush. Let's add a little bit more of that. Mm. And I'm going to add a little bit more of that lovely wild fuchsia down here. Okay, now I just want to show you, that's about all I'm going to do because I really want to get on to the actual demo. Here's one of my fan brushes. So if you're putting paint on, um, and you see perhaps too many brush strokes, or perhaps you're concerned that you're going to get a watermark in a place where it seems like there's an unequal distribution of water. That's what makes watermarks. You can kind of blend things very nicely with a fan brush. So I just want to show you, I'm going to blend it just a little bit. That's about all. And before I let this dry, I'm going to take my nice trusty cloth rag and I'm going to dry off every edge on the top and the bottom. Look how much paint got underneath the painting. Can you see that? Okay, let's just dry off top and bottom. If you don't do that, some of that paint and water that snuck underneath the paper, it's bound to creep back into the painting and make a big old watermark all the way around the four edges. And I really don't like when that happens. So I'm always very careful to wipe the four edges of the painting and then I set it aside to dry. So here we go, just set that aside to dry. If this were a little drier, I would just show you. I'll do it, but I don't know that it's going to work. I'm just going to take some water in the toothbrush and just kind of shoot it out with my finger in some of the corner areas. And actually, it is working. Let's zoom in a little closer for you. Can you see in the upper left corner little dots coming out? Those are actually little tiny watermarks that I fostered. I encouraged them to form in the negative space just for a little bit of texture. But now I'm going to put this aside and I'm going to bring back your actual demo. And here we are. Oops, let's zoom back out. Okay. But you know what? I'm looking at my clock. It is 6:15 in North Carolina. I think that means we're about halfway through our time together this afternoon. So you know what, Susan? I think this would be a great time for a 5-minute break. What do you think, Susan?
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
I
Um,
have, I've got 5:44. How about if, well, my time, let's just take 5 minutes. I'll start back at about, 10 till, well, what would that be? 10 till 2 your time? 10 till 3?
yeah, and then as you said, at the end of the demo, Alexis is going to take some question and answers. So you guys can hang on till then.
Yeah, okay. Susan, you can stop me about 10 minutes early if you want, but let's all take a break.
Yeah.
It's really important to get your eyes off your computer screen for 5 minutes.
Yep.
Go, grab a cup of coffee or whatever you need to do, and I'll see you in 5 minutes, okay?
Yep.
All right.
All right.
All
Okay.
right, everybody. So I hope that was a good introduction to the painting. And now I'm going to paint as fast as I can to try to get as much done on this painting as I can. I'm not going to have time to finish it, but hopefully I can get enough done so that you will feel satisfied having watched me paint for a while. Um, and also, just continue to appreciate the emphasis on the design, which never stops, never stops, never stops. Okay, I'm going to start. So, speaking of design, I'm going to start by painting the negative space. And I'm going to use, for starters, I'm going to use these three larger brushes. I'm going to paint wet on dry. I'm not going to re-wet the paper. Um, and I'm going to paint with a variety of cool colors, greens and variations on greens. Now, remember before when I said that I want to dull down the greens that are in the negative space so that they're not as intense as the pinks, right? So one good reason for starting with an underpainting and letting some of those pinks flow out into the negative space, they're going to start to dull things down for me, right? Pink has red in it. Red is the complement of green. So that little bit of pink that's already in the negative space is gonna give me a leg up on dulling my greens. Now, here are my two main tube greens, which I love. Viridian and Sap, cooler and warmer, two tube greens. I'm looking at my value study because I'm always concerned about value. And I need ultimately to get to a dark mid and in some places even a bit darker value in my negative space. Now, I may not get there today. There might not be time. I might not get there on the first pass, but I'm hoping to at least get to a middle value. So let's see what I can do. So I'm getting more. I need a lot of paint. This is a big area to cover. So both of my tube greens, and I love mixing purple into my greens. I've got two purples on my palette right here. It's hard to see the color on the Zoom screen. This is permanent magenta, which is a little redder. This is mauve, which is a little bluer. I particularly love mauve. It's also very dark, and I can mix it in with both of my greens, and it dulls them ever so slightly. That was the idea, wasn't it? Okay, let's go. Here we go. Now on dry paper, let's just start. I already got a little drop of paint onto what's going to become a petal, so I'll just wipe that off. Okay, so I'm just going to paint around my positive shapes, and I'm getting started right here. All right. Now I'm actually going to take this green paint and cross the edge. This is the stem right here, which is coming up and underneath the bottom of this one flower. So I'm just going to get some of that moving upwards. Okay. Now, aside from that, I'm going to keep going. And what I'm going to do is every time I go back to my palette to reload my brush, I'm going to grab a slightly different green from a different place that's on my palette. That way, I'm going to be constantly, hopefully, changing the green up a little bit. And um, and the underpainting is going to help me as well because the underpainting is variegated. And that's, as I said, it's always kind of showing through ever so slightly. And so that's going to help me to, sorry, as I'm talking, I'm having to just stop for a minute to see where I need to go. The underpainting, yes, as I was wanting to say, is going to help me to get some variation in the color of the green. All right, let's move on. This is a little complicated in here, and I actually believe that I took some of the green. Sometimes it's hard to kind of figure out what's positive and what's negative. I actually put a little of the green on top of a petal on that flower that's on the back. But since it's the flower that's in the back, I'm not too concerned. It'll be okay. We're not going to fuss over it. Okay, so you see the green here now. Let's tip this so you don't see shiny water. It's a little duller. It's not screaming out green. See in the picture, it's screaming out green. And here it's a little bit duller. Good, that's what I want to be happening. All right, you might notice that I've switched to a flat brush. I was using the round brush in here, in this area, to get me into some of those little tiny places. But as soon as I can switch to a larger brush, I'm going to do that. And the flat brush will allow me to cover more area a little bit faster. And I feel like I really do need to move as fast as possible today so that I can make the best use of my time and yours. All right, let's keep going up and around. All right, so let's see. Yeah, right. Let's just keep going. In fact, I'm going to use an even bigger brush. I'm going to get out my 1 inch. This is my biggest of the flats made by the Aqua Elites. And so I'm going to use the edge of the brush very carefully to come around the flowers, around the shapes of the petals. As soon as I finish getting this negative space painted, you're going to clearly see those lovely flower shapes popping out. All right, let's keep making color changes on the greens. Almost there. Then I can start to think about the flowers themselves. All right, so you see the way, oops, let's turn around. And do you notice the way I'm turning the paper constantly? I find that it's easiest for me to do that if it's not taped down or even clamped down. I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt blue onto my palette up in the upper left corner. I'm feeling like I want to go a little bluer, and there already is cobalt blue in the painting, in the underpainting, remember? And so I want the variation of the blue there. Where does this flower go now? Okay. I'm going to do this as fast as I can now. In fact, I may not come all the way to the edges of the flowers just so that I can move mostly around these guys. I can always come back and finish the negative painting later, but we're almost there now. Okay, this corner now, let's turn it back around. This corner, look at that lovely drip I just got. I like that drip. Okay, I'm going to, in this upper right corner, that's where I'm going to meet up with the flower that's behind the one that's not as important to me. Do you remember that? So I'm just feeling like right here, I'm going to lighten it up a little bit more, maybe even a little bit more than what I indicated on my values study. We'll just lighten it up. And the value of the negative space, see, I'm thinking about negative versus positive. I'm also thinking about not wanting to take attention away from my focal area. So I'm going to deliberately let this lighten up here a little bit more, even a little bit more than I was originally planning on. And I've pretty much covered the whole area of the negative space now, except for one little section in here. So you know what? I'm just going to grab my pointed brush. This is a number 16 round in my hand. I need a pointed brush to get into this little space right here because it's so small. There, got it. Okay, now it's a lot wetter here. And so what I'm going to do is just tip the paper. And as I tip the paper, can you see that I'm kind of curling the paper also? Can you see the way I'm curling it? I really love to do this. It helps to make the paint move. It very well may result in some watermarks happening. Sometimes people call them blossoms or blooms or watermarks. It may make them start to happen, but you know what? I got to tell you, I don't mind watermarks, and sometimes I even make them happen deliberately. Here's a really interesting thing to know about watermarks. What causes a watermark is when you've got an area like right here that is different in its moisture level than an adjacent area. And what happens is that where the paint is wetter, it pushes into a drier area. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to make some watermarks happen. Think about that again. Where the paper is wetter, right here again, I'm going to deliberately make it even wetter. And I'm taking a wet mark right up to an area that's drier. Can you see the difference? It's really shiny here and it's not here. What happens again is the wetter paint moves faster. I'm doing it again down here. The wetter paint moves faster and it pushes its way into the drier area and it keeps pushing. And as it pushes paint ahead of itself. It's almost like a snowplow. You people in Southern California might not be able to relate to the concept of a snowplow. However, it's like a snowplow pushing snow ahead of itself. And when the amount of moisture between the wetter area and the drier area, when it all kind of meets and evens out, things stop moving. And where they stop moving, you get that lovely feathery dark shape, which is a watermark. I'm deliberately making some watermarks now. I rather like them. There are places where I don't want them, but I think they'll be beautiful in my negative space. They're going to suggest leaves or other plants that are in the background. I think they're just fine. Okay, so I have deliberately created some watermarks by adding wetter paint against drier areas. And as I did with the little tiny underpainting, I can also take some water in my toothbrush or even paint. Let's try paint in the toothbrush. So this is a bit of more of the sap green. And I'm going to spritz a little bit of it in the corner here. I'm going to protect my flower, the pink area, with my hand. And just spritz a little bit of it in the corner. And it might actually, aside from depositing some sap green, it may also make some little watermarks because it's wetter. I'm going to do it there too. Another way to do that is with your spray bottle. So maybe in the lower right area where it's starting to dry nicely, I'm going to just give a little spritz of water and see if that makes some watermarks there too. All right. So the takeaway there is don't be afraid of watermarks. Understand what makes them. It's important to understand what creates them so that you can avoid them if you want to, but you can also make them happen when you want to. Okay. All right. So now we can clearly start to see positive versus negative space. I do want to say that there is one place here, right in here, I really have a lot of paint that's kind of backed up right in there. And I just want to touch it with my towel here too. Just so that it was just way too much paint just sitting there on the surface. Okay, let's think about the flowers. All right. So I'm going to wake up my iPad, which has gone to sleep. And the iPad is going to give me some information now about the flowers. And what I want to do, I'm going to clean off all this green. I can leave a little of that mauve if I want to, but I'm just going to clean off most of the green because I don't want the green in the flowers for the most part. Maybe I'll have a touch of green inside the flowers, but not much. Okay, clean off the top. All right. All right, so for the flowers, I'm going to mix some paint up now just to get it ready to use. I'm going to go back into my wild fuchsia. This time I'm going to mix it a little thicker because I want to go a little bit darker. My value study now, it's kind of served its purpose because there's no information in the value study about the flowers themselves. All right. Some of the cobalt violet. Now, the cobalt violet can only go so dark, straight out of the tube, full strength. It's really only a middle value. So ultimately, if I want to go into anything darker, I'm going to need to dip into my purples, most likely. So here's some of my permanent magenta. That's my redder purple. And then here's the mauve. All right, so what I want to do, let's just start on this flower. I'm going to concentrate more on this flower, everybody, for today, because I really would like to be able to get off the masking fluid on at least one of these flowers, and we'll see if I can get enough done here and then get the masking fluid off. So what I want to do now is I'm going to darken around the center of the flower. What I'm doing now is I frequently call this push pull. And so there are places now on this flower where I want to push one petal back, and that will pull the adjacent petal forward. Push, pull. And so I just used a bit of the cobalt violet, more, it's a thicker mixture. And I put it right over the edge of the masking fluid on the center. And I also painted it right up to the edge of two petals that are coming out in front, actually three petals. And so it's pushing these areas that I'm painting darker now, it's pushing those areas back. And where I'm stopping it along an edge, it's pulling that area forward. So you can start to see, let's come in closer for you, here and here and here, coming in closer. Let's go a little bit darker. I've zoomed in closer for you so you can't see my palette as well. Here's my palette. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm taking the cobalt violet, mixing a little mauve into it to darken it a little bit. Let's try this again. So right down here, by the way, I'm using a number 16 brown brush. I use my bigger brushes for as long as I can, so I don't get too picky. All right, so what I'm doing now is I'm painting with this darker mixture around the base of these two same petals and up and over the masking fluid, which gives me that freedom. Now with water, I'm just teasing that mixture of pigment out and away. I can leave the petals lighter towards their edges, towards their outer edges. But in the case of this one right here, for instance, I want it to be darker because it's going in to the depth of the flower. I'm going to drop in a little bit of the wild fuchsia just to punch up the pinkness towards the center. It was looking a little too purpley, too blue. I may have just made a watermark. We'll let it go if it's going to make a watermark. Not going to worry. Okay, but that's going to start to look like it's going into the center of the flower. When I paint flowers, I try to think like a flower, to kind of understand what's happening with that flower. Let's make this petal now really start to read more. So I'm going to take some of that cobalt violet mixture, darker mixture, and come around. Let's come around the whole edge of it. And oh my gosh, at this point, I'm bumping up against the petal from the adjacent flower. Oh, that's nice. All right, we'll do that. Okay, now with water in my brush, water, let's just tease this pigment out and away so I don't end up with a hard edge there. And I'm going to do something now, which I love to do. and that is to cross an edge. So right here, can you see? I'm going to do it again for you. I want to make sure you see me do it. I would honestly prefer that the background negative space was a little drier right now, but I don't have that luxury. So I'm just crossing the edge now with a little bit of that purple mixture into the negative space. Crossing an edge helps to move the pigments through the painting. It helps to unify the colors. It also helps to make this look more like a painting. I don't want it to look like a photograph. I want it to look like a painting. Crossing edges also simply feels very free, and I like to do it where I can. You might have noticed when I was painting the negative space with all those greens, I was not crossing the edges into the flowers, however, because I want to keep the flowers cleaner and pinker, if you will. So I didn't want to get too much green in them. But getting some of the pink into the green is a great idea. Again, it's going to dull it down a little bit. So do it where I can. Oh, right here. Let's just do it. Cross right over. Did you see what I did right there? I'll do it again. Cross right over the edge into that negative space. Sure, it feels great. The first time you try it, it might be really scary, but it feels great once you get used to it. Okay, let's see how dry we are here. We're getting there. It's drying pretty nice and fast tonight in my studio. I want to let this dry for another couple of minutes. So I know I said that I wasn't going to really work on this flower, but since I want to let things dry there, I'll just do a little bit on this flower as well. Remember I said that this lower flower, lower left, and the upper one are more of my focal area. So it kind of makes sense actually to get going on this one just a little bit. So once again, I'm thinking about push-pull, thinking about darkening around the center. Yep, it's working. Speaking of darkening around the center, I'm going to go back into this one. Do you notice the way I keep turning this painting around? I hope you notice that. Again, part of the reason why I like to leave the painting untaped. I never tape a painting, pretty much never. But I'm not even using the clips. As long as I don't need them, I can get my hands on the paper. I can move it easily. And you can see that I do that frequently. Can you see these petals? They really are starting to push and pull. Now I'm going to go back to this flower. And right here, can you see where I've got my finger? There's a line. You can see my pencil line ever so slightly. The pencil line here above my finger is describing where this petal above the line is overlapping on top of the one that's below the line. So once again, right here, I'm going to darken below the line to create a little more push-pull. So you see one long stroke there. And now I'm going to soften it with water. Okay, so now I've got push-pull happening right here. Now it looks like this petal is on top of the one that's just below it in the drawing. Let's do it on the next one as well. Push, pull. So I've got to do this push, pull all through these flowers. Let's soften that line. You put the paint down and then you quickly soften it. So I've got to do this push, pull all over the place. Here is the petal right here, and I'm turning again right here. And this petal is coming, let me turn it back the correct way. This one right here. It's kind of coming straight out at us, and it's bending over itself almost like a cup right here. So what I need to do here is along the edge where it's bending and coming towards us, I need to darken it. And so I'm going to darken right here along that edge. I'm not sure I'm going to get the whole thing darkened. I'm going to get it started for you though, right here. And let's take it all the way and over the masking fluid. Let's let the masking fluid do its job for me and let me paint freely. Thank you, masking fluid. Oops. So now you can see this little cup here? It's starting to show the inside of the cup or the bowl and the outside. How about that? All right. There are a couple of interesting places on this painting also. Well, I actually think there are many interesting places. I noticed when I studied my source photo that there are places where you've got two petals, one overlapping the other, and where they overlap, the light is kind of coming through two layers of petal material. And so it looks darker where you've got the overlap. And so I want to suggest that in a couple of places. So I'm mixing on my palette now. This is a bit of the cobalt violet. I'm going to touch it with a little bit of the mauve. Let's add a little bit of the pink in there. Okay, so I've got a darker mixture. So right here now on this flower, where these two petals are overlapping one another, instead of creating the push-pull by darkening below the line, I'm going to make a shape that is suggesting the edge of both of these petals on top of each other, creating a darker area where they're overlapping each other. So that's what that shape is meant. That's what that shape is meant to suggest. It's still a little bit too dark here. I'm sorry, a little too wet here. And so the end of that shape that I made just kind of fuzzed out because it was too damp. We're just going to let it go, but you can at least see it happening here. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on the time. Let me show you a little bit of work on the negative space. I've got all kinds of interesting shapes in the lower right corner, all kinds of stems and leaves and interesting things happening here. And it's still pretty wet in a couple of places. I don't know if you can see, you can on your Zoom screen. You can see how shiny it is. It's still really wet. But there are a few places where it's a little bit drier. And I just want to show you that I'm going to do another layer of negative painting in the negative space itself to start to describe some of the leaves and the stems that are down there in the lower right corner. I'm adding some of those greens back onto my palette. I'm going to leave some of these purples that are already on the palette from the flowers themselves because they can help these greens out that I just put onto the palette. Let's see what I can do. I have to really um, figure out where the paper is dry enough. Right down here in the corner, it feels pretty dry. It feels a little bit cool when you touch your paper. If it feels dry on the surface, but it feels cool at the same time, that generally means that there's still water beneath the surface that hasn't evaporated yet. But if it feels mostly dry, then it's probably safe to glaze on it. And that's what I want to be doing. So I'm just kind of touching the paper here and there to figure out where it's going to be, you know, not too, where if I make a mark like this, they're not going to fuzz out completely because it's too wet. So you can see I'm just painting negatively now. Let's tip the paper so you can see. You see I'm painting around shapes. Right here, it's still really, really wet. Let's try. I'm just going to make a mark here. it actually was wet right here and I couldn't see it. And I ended up with a soft little trail of color, which, once again, I don't mind. But if I want these shapes for sure to read, here's a little tiny shape right here that I drew. This is kind of in between the main stem and a leaf. If I want any shapes to read like that with a defined edge, I need to make sure that things are pretty, things are pretty dry. Let's see where else I can go. Everything is still pretty wet. I will say that I sometimes do use a hair dryer to speed things
Alexis,
along.
you need to move your head. There you go.
Sorry, I do that. I do that all the time. I stick
You're
my
not
head.
alone. Thank you.
I get my head in the way because I want to see what I'm doing. What was I saying? Oh, about a hair dryer. I've got a hair dryer in my studio. Honestly, I prefer not to use it because it pushes the paint around, and I really like the paint to kind of dry on its own. I think that when the paint dries on its own, it can do really wonderful, magical things. So honestly, I try not to use a hair dryer. Um, so therefore, when I'm doing a demo like this, I'm kind of stuck. And I just have to keep moving around to where things are dry enough to keep going. They're fairly dry over here. I'm going to go back and look at my value study. Here it is. You take a look too. What do I have in my value study? Oh my gosh, the darkest darks are meant to be right in here. Am I there yet? No way. No way. In fact, this is pretty dry now, and look how much lighter it has dried. All right, let's see if I can get darker around here, closer to what I had planned, designed. Okay, here we go. I just mixed some um, Viridian green and a bit of that purple. And look what's happening, everybody. You see that? It's going darker. Look at that. Whoa. All right, now I don't have to go that dark everywhere in the negative space, but around here, yeah, that was the plan. Let's make a color change right here. So I put a little more sap green in my brush, but I'm keeping it dark-ish, thicker paint, painting right up to the edge again, not crossing the edge. Want to keep that flower looking nice and clean and intensely pink. Use that color word. But right up against the edge, go dark. Sure. Dark is beautiful. Dark creates drama. Dark creates depth. Absolutely. Look what's happening to the painting now. I'm going to pick it up so you can see it without the shine. Woo! Do you see what's happening? Now, I'm going to need to get a lot more of this dark or dark-ish value going, but I at least wanted to get some of that started for you tonight. It's not going to be finished. I wish I was a faster painter. I'm just not. But I think that I can at least get enough started so you can really see the process and understand also the thinking behind it. All right, so up here, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to take this all the way. I'm just going to take a little bit of water, and I can soften this out a little bit so I don't have super hard edges. And I'm just going to let that dry. But I think you can see that the introduction of that darker paint, and even this is going to dry a little bit lighter because there's water in there. It will dry a little bit lighter. But that darkness really, really makes a difference. How am I doing on time? Oh, we're good on time. I got a few more minutes here. Yay.
So you have all the way to 4 if you want.
What's that?
We usually go to 4, so you
Oh,
can stop whenever.
Oh, yes. 4 o'clock is 7 o'clock here, and that gives me 35 minutes. As I said, I want to leave 10 minutes or so for questions.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I wasn't planning on stopping before 4 o'clock.
No. I'm just saying, don't worry, you got plenty of time.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
where was I? Oh yeah, while I've got some of this darker paint in my brush, I just want to um, let's try a little bit of it in here. I'd like to try to get there's a nice big stem connecting with this guy right here. And I'd really like to make it start to read. Let's give it a whirl, see if it's dry enough. So I'm painting with the darker now. Right here is where I accidentally took some of the green over what was meant to be a petal on the third flower that's in the back. So I'm going to have a little bit of green on that petal. Now I can try to lift it off and clean it up using one of those brushes that I showed you that I use for making corrections. But you know what? On the other hand, it might actually be kind of nice to have that a little bit of green there. You know, the flowers themselves could have some green, some of the green from all the leaves and the all the stuff that's growing there. Some of that green could very well be reflecting. Color bounces around a lot and it reflects on nearby adjacent surfaces. And so a little bit of that green on that petal right there could turn out to be kind of nice. And so I'm not going to fight it for now. I've got some rather strong purple. I'm going to zoom in closer for you. This is negative space right here above and beneath the end of my brush. This is negative space, background. And I dragged some of that purple deliberately off the flower. And I really like that purple. Instead of covering that up with green, I'm going to try something. On my palette right now, I'm mixing a rather dark puddle right here of mauve. By the way, people frequently ask me what brand is my mauve. Well, they frequently ask me, wait a minute, I just went over the wrong place. People frequently ask me about what brand my paints are in general. And I'll say most of my paints are Cheap Joe's brand, which is American Journey, and also Da Vinci. Most of them. I do have an occasional paint that's Holbein or M. Graham, but most of them are American Journey from Cheap Joe's and Da Vinci. The mauve happens to be from Da Vinci. I don't think Cheap Joe's makes it in American Journey. So if you like the mauve that I've been using tonight, and by the way, anybody who's in the workshop, um, I think you've probably already gotten a supply list. I'm happy to send it to you again. No problem. But anyhow, that mauve comes from Da Vinci, just so you know. And I do use it a lot. I really do like it. Okay, so I'm taking this darker value now and I'm doing some rather careful negative painting in here to start to make this stem appear, going up and into the flower. I think I need to make it a little smaller. The stem sort of, it widens. And I'm sure there's a botanical term that a botanist would know what that part of the flower is called, but it widens as it comes up and hooks under the flower. So we've got that there. And you see the purple is right there, the mauve. And since I put the mauve on the left side of the stem, I'm actually going to drop a little bit of mauve on the right side as well. A couple of minutes ago, just darkened it there with the darker mixture of the meridian. But I'm just going to, I like to kind of continue it a little bit underneath the shape. So it makes more sense and it feels like things are continuous under there. So we'll get that mauve going right there. I'm just kind of dropping it in now. So it holds its own and reads a bit. And while I'm doing that, I'm just looking right down here. Let's go a little darker right down here as well. I'm just feeling, sometimes the painting starts to talk to me. I get to a certain point and the painting talks to me in a sense. And it just says, darken me here. So I'm going to use that mauve again right there in this little V notch. Okay, and that's going to really push us deep down back behind the flower. Remember that idea of the push pull? And I'm going to drag that paint down and away a little bit. Okay, making some progress here. I want to do a little bit of texture on a couple of these petals. These guys are probably in a better position than these guys up here, which I haven't started nearly as much. Just to show you a little bit of the texture on these petals. And then I'm going to try to get this masking fluid off so that I can show you how I'm going to adjust the shape if necessary and add some color back in. All right, I'm going to tip the painting this way. And I'm going to clean off my palette. I want to get rid of the green now. So I want to do some dry brush on the flower. I'm not an expert on flowers. I'm not much of a gardener. I love flowers and I love painting them, but I'm rather lazy and don't like to spend a lot of time working in a garden. So I'm not an expert on flowers. But when I study the source photos that I have of these flowers, I have the sense that they've got some crinkly texture. The petals have some crinkly textures and even a bit of striation to them. And so I'm going to try a bit of dry brush. And I'm going to use two different brushes. I'm going to try first with my Princeton Aqua Elites. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to grab a really old brush that I have. This is made by, um, sorry, I just lost it. It is made by Robert Simmons, this brush, and they don't make them anymore. So I've been using these brushes more for demos lately because you can buy these. Unfortunately, you can't buy these anymore, but if this one doesn't work, I know this one will. This brush is probably 15 years old. I can't wear it out. And believe me, I've tried. Um, let's try some dry brush though. Now with dry brush, basically you need your paper to be dry and it's dry enough. I'm touching it, it's dry enough. And you also need relatively dry, meaning not super fluid and runny paint in your brush. So you're taking a brush that's dry-ish and painting on a dry surface. So another name for it is dry on dry, or you can simply call it dry brush. So on my palette now, I just put a bit of the cobalt violet and a bit of the wild fuchsia and kind of mixed it. And I'm using I like to use a flat brush a lot when I'm doing dry brush. So the paint that's in the brush now, it's a bit too fluid. I can make a nice kind of wet-ish mark if I want to. What I'm going to do though is tap the brush on my towel back and forth a few times. That sucks a lot of the water out of the brush. There still is paint in here, but less water. And then the thing that I like to do is to split the brush with my fingernails. This is where I wasn't sure if this brush is going to work so well. These are still relatively new brushes for me, and I'm not entirely sure how they're going to behave. What I can do now is take the brush and very gently make a stroke. I make the stroke go from the innermost part to the outermost part. And you can see, especially if you look, you can see it now at the outside, that the stroke is starting to break up because the hairs are split. And where the hairs are split, they're going to make individual little marks. And so if I make a long stroke like that, I am going to try my old trusty brush now because I think it's going to split better. So if I load my brush up, once again, I'm loading the brush up. Okay. And then I like to dry it 1, 2, 3, 4 times, a few times on the towel. Suck some of that water out. Split the brush. Yeah, this one's splitting better. I knew it would. Okay. And then I can make another mark. I can overlap them a bit. And I start the mark from the inside, take it to the outside. Oh, look at that. Cross the edge. Why don't you? Cross the edge into the green. It's not going to hurt. I promise you, it's not going to hurt. All right, let's try it in a couple of more places. Let's get a little texture on this petal over here. And you know what? I'm going to start the dry brush right along the edge. Here's the edge of the next petal. So the dry brush is going to create some texture. Here I go again, crossing the edge. It's going to create some texture and also help to start the push-pull right over here, which I haven't actually painted yet. Another thing I like to do with the dry brush is to take it this way. You can use the point, which is pretty dry, and I can make some individual marks. More like painting with a pointed brush, but you can use the point on the edge of the dry brush and make some more marks. Okay, so can you see what's happening now? If you just look here and compare this look to this petal that's right next to it that I haven't done it to, this one looks really smooth, and these two guys are starting to get a feeling of the texture. Now I don't have to do it everywhere. Guess what? In my focal area, I'm going to put more texture. Let's zoom back out. I'm going to put more texture on these guys right here, and probably these petals right here on this one. As I move over towards the last one, which is getting pushed behind because it's not as important, I'm going to put less texture. I want more interesting texture here in my focal area. That's where I want my viewer to be. Okay, I want to do a little bit more dry brush, and I want to show you where. And I'm going to do it right here because the dry brush, one of the nice things about dry brush is that you can do several things. You can do 3 things at the same time with dry brush. 3 things. And that's a great thing to be able to do 3 things at once. You can add texture, you can darken value, and you can adjust color all at the same time. How perfect is that? So I want to darken just a little bit. And in fact, I'm going to grab my 1/4 inch brush. That was a 1/2 inch I was using. Let's darken right in here. Okay, so I'm going to darken with the dry brush marks. I want to darken in here because I really want to push it back. Okay, I just loaded this is a 1/4 inch brush. You can see how dark the mixture is on my towel. Can you see that? And now we'll split it. And right in here now, let's make a couple of dry brush strokes. That's actually wetter than I wanted it. It looks shiny. If it comes off your brush and it looks shiny, that's not a dry brush. All right, let's drag it out. Let's drag that paint out and away. Darker. Oh, yes. Now I'm getting some nice little dry brush strokes. Oh, lovely. Okay, but this is darker now because of the addition of the dry brush. So once again, it's adding texture and darkening value. In this case, it's not changing the color a whole lot. I'm not trying to change the color, but I am trying to darken the value. See how much darker that is? Can you see that? It's darker there, really pushing down into the flower. Okay. Whew. All right. Still pretty dry, pretty wet in a lot of places. And I've shown you what I've shown you tonight, however, I'm just kind of stalling for a little time here. So what have I shown you tonight so far? I've shown you how to make up an underpainting. Here's the dry underpainting that I did. So I've shown you how I did. Of course, I walked you through the drawing, the value study and the drawing of the shapes. Yes. Then I showed you how to make your underpainting. Then I painted negatively all around, painted the whole negative space basically, carving out around the positive shapes. Then within the positive shapes, started doing that lovely push pull. So the flowers no longer look flat. They're curving, they're curling. There are parts that are going back in space, parts that are coming forward in space. Yes. Then I went back into the negative space and started showing you how I'm going to do more negative painting in the negative space to make some of the smaller shapes start to read. Then I reached for my darks, and they're still kind of wet, but I've got darks going in several areas using my values study as a reminder and a guide. And then I did some dry brush. Okay, have I stalled enough? Have I waited long enough? I hope so, because what I want to do now is to get at least some of this masking fluid off. Now, masking fluid is really tricky stuff. I didn't talk to you about it before, but it's very important to make sure when you apply the masking fluid, you have to apply it on top of dry paper. Then you let it dry before you paint over it. That's why I put the masking fluid on the other day. Not that it takes days to dry, but making sure that it's dry. And then you wait, then you paint on top of it, and then you wait until that paint dries before removing it. I'm doing this with a certain amount of anxiety because this is not 100% dry. Ordinarily, I would let things dry, oh, an hour, 2 hours. By the way, I remove it with this nasty looking thing. It's like a hunk of rubber and it removes the masking fluid. I'm not going to take all the masking fluid off, in fact, because I'm still a little bit anxious. If you try, well, actually, I'll go for it. This is just a demo. All right. Here, see, this is nice white paper that has now been revealed. The reason I use the masking fluid on this area, by the way, is because I want these centers to be nice and warm and yellow. Here they are in the photo again. Now remember, I'm not interested in the bee, but do you see how warm and yellow the centers are? The other one is as well. And I didn't want that pink or pinkish purple to get under those centers because I knew that that would grade them down. And so that's why I used the masking fluid. Other uses of masking fluid are to preserve small lights or whites in your painting that you don't want to have to paint around. In this case, I just didn't want the pink there. And I knew I was going to make an underpainting with a lot of that pink and some purple. And so I wanted to protect this area. All right. Once you take the masking fluid off, however, I can come back in here now with some lovely yellow paint. Now, I haven't used yellow paint in the painting yet. Uh-oh, what's that going to do? Well, we'll talk about that. This is some of my warm gamboge. I've got two main yellows on my palette. I've got a cooler yellow, which is lemon yellow, and a warmer yellow, which is gamboge. And I see these centers of the flowers on both flowers. It's interesting. The two flowers, these are the stamens, I believe. These are the sexy places on the plant, the reproductive places. Um, they look different between the two different flowers, which I find curious and I don't understand. But what is similar on the two flowers is that this is lovely and warm. All right, so there's a basis right there of some lovely warm gamboge. And now I'm going back to my palette and I'm going to stick my brush right in here. I still have a little gamboge in the brush, but I'm going to stick it in this puddle right here that was purple-ish. And I'm just going to dot. I'm not going to paint too solidly because these centers look a little, they've got a little, they've got some texture to them. And this one here looks a little bit darker towards the bottom of the shape. Again, it's pushing back behind this petal that's pulling forward. So I'm going to darken it, and I'm darkening it with the purple that I've used elsewhere in the flower. And that's going to help to unify that yellow color with the color of the flower. Now, the other thing that I am going to do at this point, and this is really important, I'm going to take some of that lovely gamboge. Here it is on my palette again. Lovely gamboge. And I'm going to take some of that gamboge, and I think I'm going to put it right out here. If the gamboge is only in two places in my painting, here and here, I think that it's going to, it's not going to look like it's in harmony with the other colors in the painting. Harmony, by the way, is an important word in design that we're going to be talking about in 3 weeks. So to avoid any kind of disharmony, if you will, I'm going to take some of that gamboge. Now, remember, it is going to be here in a few days. When and if I finish this painting, I'll take that masking fluid off and put more of the gamboge there. But in the meantime, I can get some of this gamboge elsewhere in the negative space. I'm just brushing it on. Wet on wet in a few places. The paint is still kind of dry. I'm sorry, the paint is still kind of wet. So when I brush it on, it's more like wet on wet still, if you can believe it. Let's get it in another couple of places. Where am I going to get a little gamboge? Maybe right here. I don't want it to start looking like I'm just popping color on randomly, but I want to repeat it. And this is really good advice, everybody. I hope you're hearing this. If you introduce a new color into a painting, like the gamboge, introduce it in one place and then repeat it somewhere else. And maybe another time, and maybe another time, and certainly another time. So the color starts to move around the painting and doesn't look too isolated. That's really, really quite important. Another thing I'm going to do with this gamboge is I'm going to take it. I'm actually looking in my iPad, and there's almost a sense of some of that yellow from the center of this, the center of the flower, that's kind of reflecting out or leaking out into the adjacent area on the petal. So I'm going to cross the edge a little bit with that gamboge into the pink. And I'm just brushing it on rather lightly. I don't have to put it everywhere, but it's going to, I think, add a little bit of glow to the center of the flower. We'll look a little bit closer. Can you see that yellow kind of sneaking out and creating a little bit of nice warm glow there in the center? That did just what I wanted it to do. Okay.
So Alexis, we have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I just glanced at the clock in my studio and I could see that. Everybody, as I said before I started, I'm not a super fast painter. And I told you that I was 99% certain that I wouldn't get finished, and I didn't. But I think that what I've started to do is I've started to work on all the various areas so you can hopefully get a feel for how I think, how I plan, how I use my brush, how I mix my paints, how I utilize my value study, how I constantly think about the design. And now I'm going to stop. So here we go. All right, those of you who
That
come.
was great.
Oh, thank you.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Beautiful
Those of
painting.
you who join me in 3 weeks.
Yes.
Boy, this sounds like a total coercion. If you come back in 3 weeks, you can see this finished.
Well,
Isn't
we
that
do have
sweet?
spots open, so yes, we do want people to sign up. We have a few spots left, so please do that. So I think now would be the time if people want to
Okay.
ask
What do I have here?
questions.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to put the workshop up on the screen one more time for you all.
Yes.
So here it is, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, Q&A. Here we go. Time for Q&A.
So when you unmute, please tell us your name, and so we know who's talking.
Hi, this is Jane Sunshine, and I really enjoyed the demo, and I'm looking forward to the workshop I've signed up for already.
Yay. Wonderful.
Yay.
I had a question on when you were doing your dry brush texturing. Would you sometimes also use a fan brush for that?
That is a great question, Jane. And the answer is I don't usually do that. And I'll show you why. Let me grab the fan brush.
Could you also show yourself, Jane, when you're asking your questions, guys?
If I can figure out how to do that.
Yeah, that way we can see.
Okay, so here's a fan brush. You see the way it's round at the top? So if I were to use this to make a mark on my paper, every mark is going to be like round. And so I generally don't use a fan brush for applying paint, but there's no reason why you can't do that if you want to. It's just my preference to use a flat brush. That's all.
Okay, I just, in the workshop, I'm not going to go out and buy a new brush, and I don't have a wide flat brush. So we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well.
Okay.
Any other questions?
If there's no other questions, you could maybe talk about the things we're going to do in the workshop real quickly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Did I have any other? Let me see if I had any other. Okay. No, the only other thing I had was this, my website and my email. That was the only other thing.
Yeah, and that's also listed on our website for anybody.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, about 4 or 5 days before the workshop, I'm going to Susan, I'll take your guidance on this. I will either send to you and ask you to forward to everybody, or if you want to send me everybody's email address, I can send directly to everybody. And I'll send some information about how I like to structure the workshop and requesting people to send me pictures that they're thinking of painting. And I will also share the source photo or photos that I'm going to use for my demo painting. I'm going to work on one demo 3 days in a row. That way, in the workshop, I'll have a better chance of actually finishing a painting for you because I'll have 3 days, an hour and a half each day to paint. Just taking it from, one step to the next. And each day's painting that I do is also going to circle back to the day's lesson. And as I said, each day I'm going to start with a lesson, which will take more or less an hour. And it'll be really, really good stuff about design. And then I'll apply it to the painting for that day. And then I'll take it another step up start on Monday and then continue on Tuesday and then on Wednesday. So anyhow, you'll get my source photo. Now, sometimes people like to paint what I paint. And by the way, I'm not going to do flowers since I did flowers tonight. I'm not going to do flowers, although there probably will be some flowers, but it's going to be more landscapey architecture. I just wanted to pick a totally different subject for the workshop. Sometimes some people like to paint what I'm painting. That's why I share my source photos. And you're welcome to do that. I do not require it. And it's not the kind of workshop where I say, okay, I'm going to paint this all green, and then I'm going to stop and you paint it all green. And then I'm going to paint here. And, it's not step by step, but you can always take lots of notes and whatnot and kind of follow along.
Plus, we're going to record each day so people can always go back at the end of the day and review whatever piece they want to review.
Right. And I also send a daily email to everybody with all the steps. Like day one, I'll send you an email with my source photo, my value study, my line drawing, and the progress I've made on day one. Then the next day, I add day two to it. And I'll do that every day. So you'll have, between that and the recording, you'll have tons of information. If you want to follow along, which is entirely your choice, not required. If you want to paint your own subject with a new eye on design, with my input and feedback, that's fine too. And you can paint absolutely anything you want to paint, any subject, even abstract, which you saw a couple of my abstracts. I love to paint abstracts. So anything you want to paint is fine.
Okay.
And then I will encourage everybody before the workshop, or certainly on the first day, to send me your ideas. And then day by day, I'm going to encourage you to send me your own value, once you get started, your own value study, your drawing, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And that way, every day when we have our one-on-one time, I'll put your pictures up, just like I showed you, where is that picture? I just think this is such an important part of the work, this part. Such an important part of the workshop. When I can put your picture up on the Zoom screen and we can talk about it, and you can ask me questions and I'll give you answers and make suggestions about what to do and how to proceed and what do you do first and what technique do you use. It's a super important part of the workshop. And that's why I ask you to send me pictures.
So Alexis, let me ask this question. How early before the workshop, though, would you like them to send this information to you? You're going to give them, we usually send stuff out to the participants about a week prior, but
okay.
how, what's the time frame that you want them to send it?
They can send it anytime a week prior.
Okay.
I'm not going to be emailing with everybody for the whole week before the workshop.
Right.
As soon as the workshop starts, though, I'm all yours.
Yeah.
But you can send me stuff and I'll send you emails. Susan, like I said, you let me know how you want me to proceed. If you want to be the conduit, I can send it to you and you can forward it to everybody. Okay. But I've got tons of information for everybody to help people get started and know how to start thinking about it and what to start looking for.
Okay. The other thing students always want to know, though, is what's the size of paper you recommend they do during the, they use during the workshop?
Okay, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I think that, well, let me back up for a second. My demo that I'm working on tonight, I could measure it.
I think you said something like 12 by 12.
It's 12 inches square. My painting is.
That's what it looks.
Okay. I'm limited by the way my camera is set up.
Right.
So when I paint a demo on Zoom, I can go to about 12 by 16, but not much bigger than that.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's a great size for painting. 12 by 16, 11 by 15, which is a quarter sheet. But I've got students sometimes, and of course I can't tell. You send me your painting, and on my
you can't. Yeah.
They
Right.
all look exactly. And sometimes I'll say to a student, I'm just curious, how big is that painting? And they'll go, oh, it's about 6 by 8. You know,
Yeah.
seriously, whatever size you are comfortable working
Okay.
is perfectly fine with me.
Okay.
6 by 8, honestly, I think you
Feels
can
too
start
small.
getting a little cramped. It's kind
Yeah.
of small.
I think a quarter sheet minimum would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I was going to say 9 by 12 minimum. Quarter sheet is great, I
Yeah.
think. And in
Usually
fact,
students are pretty, at least our people here, they're used to quarter sheets at least.
perfect. That's
Okay.
perfect. In fact, I've already started sketching the demo that I'm going to do for this workshop.
Okay.
And
All right.
mine is a quarter
The quarter
sheet.
sheet. Okay. Yeah.
Mhm. So
All
that's
right.
that's perfect. And I will send my supply list, but basically anything you already have is fine. If you see me, like using those Princeton brushes and you go, oh my God, I've got to have them. Well, you can go out and buy them anytime.
Yeah.
You don't need to buy anything ahead of time. Use what you have, use what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
I will be using cold press paper. So I can kind of tell you that right now,
Yeah.
but pretty much
Okay.
anything you want to, whatever you have in your palette. It would be great if you have nice fresh paint in your palette.
We will tell them
Um,
that. Okay.
mhm.
Well,
So,
that
but
sounds really good.
whatever pigments you're used to using, you can. One thing I didn't mention tonight is that most of my pigments are non-staining. I really prefer using
Right.
non-stainers as opposed to stainers because
Okay.
I've got more flexibility to soften edges or lift paint to make a correction. I like the flexibility of the non-stainers, but
Yeah.
if you like using staining pigments, go right ahead and use them. No problem.
Okay. And our
As long as
supply
they're
list, your supply list is on our website as well. So,
Oh, cool. Great.
yeah.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, there's no other questions that I can see in the chat. Does anybody, last chance here? We're at 4:02. Nope. Okay. Well, we're getting a lot of thank you. Beautiful painting. Love the instructions. And hopefully we'll get some signups from this. So thank you very much. We're going to sign off,
Thank you,
guys.
Alexis. Thank you.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
Alexis.
Yeah.
It's been a
Beautiful.
pleasure and it's
Yeah.
an honor to be asked to do. It truly is.
Well,
And
we
I enjoyed
appreciate it.
And
Yeah.
I hope that little mini design lesson, whether you come back for the workshop or not, I think you got some really useful information in that
Oh,
little
yeah.
design lesson. So
Yep.
go
Yeah.
for it.
Yep.
Use it.
Oh,
Loved it.
all
Yeah.
right. Well, have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.
Thank you.
Okay. See you in 3 weeks. Some of you.
Yep, that's right.
Take care.
And I'll be
Bye-bye.
talking to you before then. So
Yay, wonderful. Okay. And I hope everything's all right with Vicky.
I think she just had to be somewhere and then totally she forgot or something. I think she's fine. Yeah.
She double booked herself, I bet.
Okay, she double booked. Okay. Well, anyway.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Bye
Bye,
now.
y'all.